There is a garden, there is a city, and there's a kingdom of God. And it is beautiful, and he is bringing it right now into our midst.
Good morning, everyone. Hey, welcome to those of you online and in the Life Center. We're glad you could be with us this morning as well. Before we dive in, I want to follow up with something that Pastor Brian's just mentioned. And I want to ask a request of all of us as one of the pastors here. And I actually do this on behalf of our entire staff. So if you'll have a look up here, this is a pastor's request for a moment. I have three actually requests for you. One is, can I ask us all in this series to be really active and engaged in this topic? As we say each week, we have devotional resources. This week, Brian Rice wrote this one. Please, please, please pick this up, read through it this week, because it's really integral to what we're going to be doing over the next weeks. A week from this Wednesday, on the 13th of March, Pastor Brian's going to be doing a seminar here. It's called Making More Sense Out of Suffering, and we invite everybody to come. If we need to open this room up because we're going to pack it, that's fine. So that's on the 13th of March. So please lean into this, as we would say, and that's number one. Number two, related, these four messages we're doing starting today go together. Trust me, we are going to just barely scratch the surface this morning on some of the things that we need to wrestle with. So next week, the week after that, Brian and Aaron are going to be speaking. Please connect on those. Come back, be here each week. If you're out of town or something, watch online or watch after. There'll be it'll make a whole in the end. And then third, Brian mentioned this already, this topic around suffering requires community. I am so grateful for our small group ministry, our men's ministry, our women's ministry, our counseling center. Friends, if you're here today and you need help, you need assistance, things get stirred up in you, please, please, please reach out. Go to the prayer room if it's helpful. Connect in a ministry that you're in already. If you're a guest and you don't know where to go or what to do, just call the office and say, hey, can I talk to one of the pastors? We would be more than glad to do that. So those are my three requests for us, if we would all lean in. All right, let's jump in today. So at Christmas of 1991, I received a book for a gift, Christmas. It's called How Long, O Lord? Reflections on Suffering and Evil. Isn't that a nice title to get for Christmas? It was from my brother and his family, and there was an inscription on the inside of the book. Here it is. For Brian, with encouragement that you read this, prayers that you heed this, but hopes that you never need this. Merry Christmas. Isn't that nice? It's nice, right? You know what I did with the book? I put it on the shelf. Didn't turn past that page of the inscription. Just put it on the shelf, let it sit there for 10 years until this. And then I picked it up. Because then I had questions. Because then I wanted to know, how long, O Lord? Then it meant something to me. Well, that was a global event, September 11th. I want to tell you something personally that happened to me. I grew up with a very, very, very close friend of mine named Adam Goldberg, good Jewish kid from Long Island. And I called him Mo always. We were inseparable for the first 18 years of our life. We were very, very, very close. Matter of fact, I was closer to him than I was to my two older brothers. We did just everything together, sports, and we went to Hebrew school together. We just did everything. We went on vacations together. I knew his parents well, all of that. Well, when I was 18, I went off to college. He kind of did his own thing, and we started to drift apart a bit, but in our 20s, we stayed very, very close as well, and we started to live very, very different lives. He became pretty wealthy. He actually became a model in New York City, got married, had a child, but he also had a terrible drug addiction. And he was promiscuous, and he drank, and he became an alcoholic, and his life just went downhill. I mean, it was just bad. And after about 2000, 2001, 2002, I kind of lost track of Mo, and I knew that he still lived in the neighborhood I grew up in, but I just didn't follow up with him or whatever. In 2007, in the spring, I got a phone call from my mom, and she said Mo had died a year before. It hurt that Mo had died. It was devastating that it was a year before. I just had the hardest time processing that. It just was this kick in the gut. I couldn't catch my breath. In the words of C.S. Lewis, I didn't know that grief felt so much like fear. I didn't know how to process it. So I knew right away that I said to Susie, we were living in Colorado, I need to go back to New York, and I need to see his gravestone. Mo and I used to joke when we were kids, when we were teenagers, that the first of us to die would be buried at Pine Lawn Cemetery on Long Island, because that's where the rich people got buried. I know, crazy. So where did I go? I went to Pine Lawn Cemetery, and I found Mo. So we drove up on this dreary May day, almost 1 year to the day from the time he died. And I got out, and I stood at his grave, and I prayed. I put a stone on the top of it as a memorial, as Jews do. And I really didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say to God. I was bewildered by it. I was reminded of this comment by C.S. Lewis in A Grief Observed after his wife had died, where he said, suffering makes relevant and personal the question of whether God exists and whether he is good. Until then, the question is of no serious importance. You see, until we suffer on some level, we can sort of treat God like a pet, like a mascot. But when something like this happens with my friend Mo, and how broken his life was, then I had to look back at God and say, God, are you there? Are you good? And how good are you? And what is all this about? And why did it take a year for me to find out that my best friend had died? You see, there is no question really until we get into situations like that. Now, my guess is, I'm certain of this, that all of us in this room have stories like this. It may not be about your best friend. It may be about a loved one. It may be about something completely a different scenario than this. But live long enough, and you and I will suffer, and we will feel pain. So today we want to introduce this topic and dive in three ways. The first is we want to talk about some foundational truths and realities. There's some building blocks. Second, we want to talk about the questions that we ask and actually that the Bible asks. And then third, we want to introduce this idea that we'll talk about in the coming weeks about mystery and the story we find ourselves in God's story, this idea of mystery. So first, some truths. First, evil is the objective fact of bad and broken things, and evil is not made up, and it is not an illusion. You read from Genesis chapter 3 all the way to almost to the end of the book of Revelation, and evil is very, very real. In Genesis chapter 3, we see the introduction of evil because of the serpent who tricks Adam and Eve, and this thing called sin enters the world. Read the first 2 chapters of the book of Job, and you see this dialogue between God and Satan. Friends, these are very, very, very difficult truths. We live in a world today that is so relativistic that either evil doesn't exist or it exists in some forms but not other forms. And unlike someone like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who said, "Where does evil reside?" Through the heart of every single one of us. We think instead that evil's out there somewhere, that there's bad things that happen because of terrorism or because of other things that have nothing to do with me. So in other words, we have this sort of confusion of, well, I'm good and everything else is bad. When G.K. Chesterton was asked what's wrong with the world, he said, "I am." And his point was that inside every single one of us, there is this sin, there is this brokenness, there is this idea of we can be our own gods in a sense. This idea that we can go without and do our own thing. Now, if I'm you sitting here today and you're listening to me, I would guess that I would be sitting there going, okay, can you please move on to your next point now? See, because we don't want to talk about this. We prefer to have this vague utopian kind of idea about the world and not be naysayers. And we have some superstition about, like, if we talk about this, then bad things will happen. And if we do this, knock on wood, they won't. This is plastic, by the way. But what a weird thing to do. Knock on wood? What does that do? So we just have this reticence about talking about this. But this series, we're going to talk about it because we have to. And by the way, the Bible talks about it a lot. And so we have to. Here's second. Suffering is our personal experience of evil. And pain and hurt are part of suffering. In other words, we suffer because there is evil in the world. Now, sometimes we suffer because of self-inflicted pain. That's what happened with my friend Mo. Sometimes we suffer because of somebody else doing something bad or evil or sinful or whatever. Sometimes we suffer because we don't know why, but there is some vague evil or something happens that's bad, and we suffer because of it. And that is part of life. And knowing how we can suffer and suffer well is a part of flourishing. So I'm about to say something that will be insulting to all of us who call ourselves Christians, because I think we all do this. Our Christian beliefs and our attitudes often do not align. Let me explain this. This comes right out of D.A. Carson's book that I eventually did read. He says, my creed or my beliefs may tell me that I am a sinner, that all that I enjoy in life is a gracious gift from God, that I am in no position to expect to escape suffering. But when it comes right down to it, I simply feel my own suffering is unfair. And what do? We blame God, we blame somebody else. And that's because we don't understand or grasp this idea of evil and brokenness and sin. And so we take on the victim. It's sort of like in the film Fiddler on the Roof. I watch Fiddler on the Roof about once a year. Beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, there's this guy, Tevye. He's this Jewish milkman who's delivering milk, and it's right before the Sabbath. And he usually delivers it with his horse. He does it fast. But his horse has become lame. His leg became lame. And so Tevye is kind of dragging his horse along, and it's taking him a long time to deliver the milk. He's having this conversation with God, Tevye is. And he says to God, God, what, did you get bored up there? And you thought, let's make Tevye's horse's leg lame. As if God was to blame for the horse's leg being lame. That's what Tevye is thinking to himself. Sure, blame God for it, because bad things happen. I think many of us need an upgrade to our theology and beliefs and practice around this. Many, many, many of us do. And that's why we're doing this series. And that's why we're having resources, and that's why we're pushing at this so much. And then last thing about truths and realities. All suffering is not the same. Now, if you are in high school here, if you're a high schooler right now, please do not be angry with this next slide, okay? Just relax. You can send me an email if you're upset, okay? But just hang in there, okay? So, a high school breakup and murder is not the same. Now, when I was 16 years old, there was a girl who broke up with me, and it really hurt. It did. So I don't mean to make light of that, but let's objectively say this. It's just not the same. There are things that are worse than other things in life. They are. And it's not to minimize something that's less, but let's just say that's true. But here's the second thing that's equally true, and it's paradoxical, and we need to hold on to both of these. The closer, more personal is the issue, the more important it feels to us. In other words, if you're suffering with something, it's really big to you. It's important. Now, objectively, somebody may look at it and go, oh, that's not that big of a deal. Okay, pastoral comment, you don't want to say that to the person. Oh, that's not such a big deal. Well, it is. Yes, it is to them. One of the worst things that we can do in this whole conversation of being community is somebody shares with me that something bad happened to them about something, and I say to them, oh yeah, that happened to me too, but it was worse. Let me tell you about it. Okay, how not to make friends and influence people at that moment. And we laugh about it, but sometimes we do it, and it's very, very, very painful. So what do we do? Just really practically. Well, somebody's suffering about something, whatever that is. Maybe it's something really dramatic, like a death of a loved one or a best friend or that kind of thing, or a breakup of a relationship. And they want to share that with me. We need to listen. We need to be there. We need to be present. We need to say, if they're open, can I pray for you? Or ask the question, is there some way I can help? Or what do you need? And then if they say to me or to you, oh, have you ever been in a situation similar to that? Well, then that's an invitation to share out my own story. But until I get asked that, my story doesn't matter. It can't overshadow. Anytime we get into this habit or get into this way of saying, well, whose suffering is worse? Or let's compare suffering. It never goes anywhere good. Never. We have to let that go. Now, sometimes I know our motives are good because we want to relate to the person. We want to sort of have misery loves company kind of thing. But trust me, I've put my foot in my mouth enough to know this, that it's never good to do that. We just need to learn to listen. So these two things are true. That objectively, we can say that not all suffering is the same. There is some of greater and lesser magnitude. And the closer it is to me, the more important I feel that it is. And both of those are true. And we must be sensitive about them. So, these are truths and realities. 2, the questions we ask. There are many, many, many questions. As a matter of fact, when you were coming in, if I handed an index card to everybody and said, tell me the questions that you have for God about this issue of evil and suffering, you would fill out more than one question on the card. I'm sure every single one of us would. So these are just some of the questions. Where is God in my suffering? If God is good, why does he allow evil to continue? If God's all powerful, why doesn't he just destroy evil? Why doesn't he just wipe it out? And why do good people suffer and bad people flourish, to use a word that we use? And you'll notice that the word good is in quotes and bad is in quotes. That's a whole other sermon. But you understand what I mean. Who's good, who's bad, why do we say that? And then what about natural disasters, which are called acts of God? Gosh, I hate that. I've had people who don't believe in God say that to me after a hurricane or after different things. That's questions that we have. What do we do with that? Those are real questions. And anyone who is honestly seeking after God, and if you're here today, whether you believe in Christ or not, I assume that you're doing some seeking, has to be able to ask these questions. And here's the good news. The Bible asks the questions too. And I love this about the Bible. The honesty, the rawness of it. There are 2 books in the Bible that the only themes in the Bible, really, the primary themes in these 2 books are the sovereignty of God and the suffering of people. The book of Job, 40-some chapters of one man's absolute breathtaking suffering, and Lamentations about the suffering of the Israelites in captivity. And then you have what we would call our song book or our worship book, which is the book of Psalms. And more than 50% of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. And about 90 Psalms, or maybe even 100 Psalms, have some lament in them, even though they're categorized differently. So our song book, our worship book as Christians, has Psalms of lament. And then here's one more, I'll come back to it in a little bit. Some of Jesus' last words on earth before he died are a question. The question comes also from the Psalms, Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? He asks his Father a question, and the most powerful question he could. And right from the Psalms that I just talked about. Listen to these words. Psalm 6. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I am faint. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are in agony. My soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord, how long? How long, Lord, Psalm 13, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Psalm 35, how long, Lord, will you look on? Rescue me from their ravages, my precious life from these lions. Psalm 74. How long will the enemy mock you, God? Will the foe revile your name forever? Why do you hold back your hand, your right hand? Take it from the folds of your garment and destroy them. Whew. Wow. And now look at this psalm. Psalm 90. I teach leadership a fair amount. And I teach this verse quite a bit. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Isn't that great? Here's the verses before it. You have set our iniquities before you, our secret sins in the light of your presence. All our days pass away under your wrath. We finish our years with a moan. Our days may come to 70 years or 80 if we have strength, if our strength endures. Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. How's that for a bumper sticker? Yet the best of them are but trouble and sorrow. The best of them. Wow. How depressing. And then verse 12 comes, teach us to number our days aright, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And then verse 13, relent, Lord. How long will it be? Have compassion on your servants. Here's what the psalmists are asking. Here's the fundamental question that they are asking. How good is God in a world so bad? That's what they're asking. How good, God, are you in this world you've made, but that is so broken and bad? How good are you? Tell us, how good are you? Now, this series, over the next 3 weeks after today, we're going to ask these questions and others. Job asked questions. Jeremiah in Lamentations asked questions. There are questions asked in the New Testament that are crucial to what it means to follow Christ today. We want to ask those questions. And you know what? They're important to ask, but here's the challenge for us. If we demand answers to every single question so that we can understand, so that we get it, then we're our own God. Because this is point 3. We must learn to enter into this idea of mystery. Pastor Brian's going to talk about this some more next week and in week 3. this idea of the mysteries of God. And I put it this way for today: the story behind your story. You see, we are all in God's story, and we find ourselves there, and oftentimes we do not have the perspective that He has, because we're not God and He is. I have learned this lesson better in a context I'm about to tell you about than anywhere else. I am fortunate to be married to a woman by the name of Susie, and Susie is a potter. She's a professional potter, actually. She's also a counselor, and Susie does amazing works of art, and she has helped me grasp this concept of the mysteries that God calls us into, and embracing that there is a story behind each and every one of our stories. Here's a video that will help us understand it a bit more.
Hi, my name is Susie and I'm a potter. I love working with clay and making things. Actually, I just made a pot and I'm kind of a mess, but that's part of the deal. In order to make beautiful things, I have to enter into the mess. I'd like to share with you a few insights about being a potter working with clay. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 64 that we are the clay, God is the potter. We are all the work of His hand. God is always at work shaping our lives, often in quiet and imperceptible ways. And so the potter starts with a piece of clay, a different size for each new masterpiece. The first and most important thing the potter must do is center the clay. If the clay isn't centered, the pot will be misshaped. So I begin to shape the pot. I'm at work to create a thing of beauty. As I work to center the clay, my hands are initially bumped around by the lumpiness of the clay. I apply consistent, steady pressure. The clay begins to conform to the guidance of my hands. And then there is this moment where it's like a sense of peace comes over the clay. The clay is centered. I can relax my hands and begin to shape and form the pot.
There's a story behind every story. There's the author behind every life. It doesn't answer all the questions. Some of us may be suffering greatly here. And yet we learn something from the psalmists as we continue to read after they asked their questions. What is their response to their own questions? Listen to a few of the responses. Psalm 6, I read verses 2 and 3. How long, O Lord? And the psalmist answers in verse 4. Turn, Lord, and deliver me. Save me in your unfailing love. Psalm 13, verse 5, I read verses 1 and 2. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. And then Psalm 22. Psalm 22 is the psalm that Jesus is saying on the cross. And the only words we hear are the first verse, my God, why have you forsaken me? but I am quite certain that he continued to recite that psalm to God as he hung on the cross. And here's what verse 4 says. You, God, are the Holy One. You are the praise of your people, Israel. In you, our fathers put their trust. They trusted, and you delivered them. And so Jesus, hanging on the cross for the brokenness and the sin of the world, sees beyond the suffering and says to you and me, there's a story behind your story, and it's a story of hope and goodness and forgiveness, and that yours and my suffering is not the end of the story, because the author of life, the potter, is at work.